Live. What's up, everybody? This is G. Mr. Drew here to welcome you to another episode of the Andrew Glowczewski Experience. This is going to be episode 136. Going to be continuing some character concept art for this character here, slash prop that I'm working on here. And yeah, I'm just going to continue drawing some stuff for him. Just to, uh, you know, I think I kind of got what I wanted, and I don't know. I'm still, honestly, I'm still reeling from, I'm still reeling from the Imagine Bloodborne contest. Um, and, just how much I need to improve on my own art in order to kind of compete with it. That being said, I've been watching. There's like a 2.5 hour interview with the guy who won the contest, and he's talking about the artwork. I'm about 45 minutes into the interview already, and I just been watching it. And I was like, "Yo, I gotta start. I gotta start the stream, man. I gotta start recording. Like, I want to draw while I listen." And, so I'm going to start the stream, but I'm listening to that interview. It's 45 minutes in. It's a 2.5 hour thing, so we're not even like halfway there. But, um, yeah, man, it's very interesting to hear a concept artist break down his concept art process and just talk about it. And so while I work on mine, I'm gonna be listening to his. Maybe I should turn the volume up, so you guys can hear it. Cause yeah, I ain't gonna be saying nothing. I mean, if anybody wants to join in the chat and talk, then yeah, for sure. Let's uh, let's chat it up. But other than that, man, I'm still suffering from the loss of defeat, and very apprehensive to draw. But gotta muscle through that pain, right? So I'm just gonna draw something, listen to that in the background, and yeah, we'll see. We'll see where everything goes.
Design, but I wanted that to be an aesthetic. It was sort of teased a lot, it was suspected a lot, and I was like, well, I might as well run with it. It won't be full on Aztec as all the art is just quite different, and also in the original game, the Nightmare Frontier is thought to essentially be Lorraine, or at least aspects of it. So I've made sure that design language from the buildings you see there are carried forward. This tower at the back is actually very close to one of the towers you see where the hill comes down. So we're getting too deep already, but
get this camera
the point
fixed.
is I have made sure I've gathered like pieces of architecture that I know already exist, so I can stay at least slightly consistent with that, and then mix my own things afterwards.
I know we're planning on keeping sort of a lore download till the end, but just for people who really have no clue, I think it might be good to say that Loran is reckoned in Bloodborne 1, so it's like it is a place that we don't. Well, I guess you might say you go to parts
All
of
right,
it, like
let
in the
me
Chalice dungeons and things like that, supposedly.
get ready
But
to
it's
start
a place
here.
that's referenced, and there's lore allusions to it is a place that was, I think it's swallowed by sand and things like that. So your moves here, your baseline moves, like the very first choices, are not out of nowhere. They are expecting lore drops that are in Bloodborne.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so every sort of base idea and everything you see here is born from looking at the lore, looking at where there was essentially gaps in the original game that I could fill with something interesting. Like I wanted to answer questions that were posed in the original, and then add some new spice that's sort of original from me. And yeah,
just to think that, bring back the idea that you never really played the game, but you're still a fan to such a degree that you built this place. And I almost say you're a super fan. And I think Stephen was kind of saying it's an even bigger flex to do that.
And I would really describe myself as a huge fan, because I have spent a lot of time, maybe not as much time as like a complete playthrough would take, but I've been through all the wikis and reading up on all the fans subreddits and obviously the YouTube videos, which are the most accessible versions. and then just scrubbing through the no commentary versions to like find aspects of the game that I couldn't otherwise get in games for. So I've like ended up having loads of experience of it. And interestingly, things like the simple movement mechanics, they were actually some of the hardest bits of information to track down because I was just like, I'm not exactly sure like what button you press. Well, maybe not what button, that's that simple, but like what exactly happens when you heal yourself? Is it instant? Is it not? That kind of thing. I was like, oh, I need to check because I haven't experienced this firsthand, and that didn't come into mind.
Even ask.
Yeah, exactly.
Ask that. So yeah, that's very thoughtful on its own. I love this. Yeah, and just, I'm biased here, probably because I was when Bloodborne 2 speculation started. I was on the side of please do Loran, please.
Excellent.
So I think I'm biased here. But as to the picture, which is beautiful, I just do want to say that one of the things that stands out to me is that you are going for sort of the From Software scale, and I think that you got it. You know, like you were talking about before, gameplay in From games tends to happen in a very wide open, like probably like 100-degree FOV kind of view behind the character. Like it's very wide, so you can see stuff coming from all sides, which makes the action combat more dynamic. But that's balanced with like this huge depth of space. You know, like you feel it a lot in Yharnam, you feel it a lot in like Dark Souls 3 for me as like some like full castles in the distance that just they may be low poly, but the sheer scale of distance between the character and things way out there in the draw distance, it really feels like they're dozens or hundreds of miles away, right? And like that huge retaining wall that you have all the way on the left side, the image over there, that captures some of that From stuff. So that's like a meta thing that you're doing there that if you had left things like that out, it wouldn't have quite felt like the From style. So that was very insightful.
Absolutely, yeah, and just that's the sort of thing you can get from just looking at a screenshot that looks cool. It's like, just quick scrub through gameplay and, just go, okay, this image is visually arresting, why? And then essentially try and match it. So, yeah, you absolutely point out the things that it does. It's things that are close to you and you can interact with things that are far away and you want to see. Like, it gives you that sort of urge to explore. And to quickly go into that a little more, games specifically need to have game-based spaces. So generally means chunks of flat ground to fight enemies on. It's always really dull when you're trying to make it function for a specific mechanic like fighting, but you want to then show that there's interest within it. So I was like, okay, I'll have like a big space here. Some enemies are coming towards you, but like big ticks, which I've called Ixodida. They're coming down ready to fight. But we've also got like a few, some planes, extra levels that we can sort of maybe go through this door here, work our way through, come through this tunnel afterwards. We can cross this little bridge. Like we can even see down here, there's another little door. So perhaps at some point you're going to go below the city. That's nice. This is a little too small, but there's a little chest over here. It's I didn't have much time to put too much detail in here, but it's a nice inclusion because it's something you can interact with. Same with this like big mechanical thing in the foreground. I don't go into. Oh, yeah.
Speaking of time, how much time would you say you spent on this piece itself?
I would go with 8 hours maybe. And a lot of it is, it's heavily photographed, so I could get a lot of this stuff in pretty quick. And it's then painting over to make sure it fits exactly what I need design-wise. So yeah, like huge chunks are like this whole piece here is originally a piece of photo. You can see I've changed the shape of all the windows. I've added doors. I've added this sort of archway here. I've added original elements of the overrun that exists in Bloodborne 1, and I've made sure that it fits into this foreground piece. But otherwise, yeah, chunks like this I didn't paint out manually. I'm not going to be painting these bricks myself, that kind of stuff.
I think on the note of making those battle planes sort of dynamic and interesting, you, and as well as FromSoft, do a really good job of adding rubble and things that sort of direct the player and make it feel like it's not just this flat, boring piece of ground that you have to sort of interact with. It really adds a lot of detail, and I feel like everywhere where they could just be a flat 90-degree angle has some sort of uneven stonework or some sort of rubble that just makes it more interesting.
this is my favorite chunk of it. It's like
Yeah.
it remains smooth, so it's like the player's not going to get stuck on it, but it still feels like such a nice chunk of like
Yeah.
the ground's like sort of warping underneath, and you're getting this disruption with stuck in the tiles. Yeah, the last thing I was just going to say, this stuff, it has no specific purpose. I don't really bring it up later on, but it hints at the larger game. It's like I could show you this myself, but the game's going to have some cool puzzle mechanics in it. Like it's going to have cogs and stuff, ancient machinery that you will operate and make things open up. It sort of like, it invites the imagination to go, oh, that could be cool. Imagine a big gate you can't get through until you pull all of the levers, for example. And if I haven't had that there, then that's just a bit of sort of the viewer's imagination that never gets triggered. So
Yeah.
it's like sort of a low effort inclusion in that it doesn't link to anything. I don't even have a closed story in the scene that it could link to, but it still sort of lays the groundwork for it.
You know, it lowers a platform somewhere. That's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. I don't need to show that. It's fine. The last thing I'll point out here, so I don't have to go back, is just that I have like some sand draining away. So, going back to the whole buried in the sand thing. Yes, it was buried in the sand. It's drained away. That's cool. So we again get another one of these. This just describes what happens in this first stage of the game. Fun references to like potentially mechanics stolen from other places. So Dark Souls, the crystal lizards. We could have crystallized Ixodida, little things that scurry away. And with each of these like sort of information dumps, essentially, I'm adding more information about the mechanics of the game because I think there's stuff that actually links into the story I'm telling, but also things that I just wanted to expand on because I had interesting ideas for how the game would play. So the main thing here is that the level up, also the healing mechanic in the first game is you take a bullet down, you stab it in your leg, and you get health back. Now you always have a cannula equipped, a nice gruesome blood-themed, very salty feeling device, and you plug in your blood sacks and drain blood into you that way. And the cannula adds an extra step in a sense, but what it does is it essentially gives another layer to the healing mechanic. So the cannula will now change the effect of your healing. So it could be it could be a bigger heal, but over a slow amount of time. It could be a small heal, like instantly. Any sort of range in between that, and also it could just give you temporary buffs. So you now have the opportunity to like, even if you don't need to heal, you can use it just for the buff, things like that. You have like more options and more reasons you might want to use it. You could use a slow healing device before you go into combat with full health, just so that during combat, when you're losing health, you're already gaining it back to sort of make up for that.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's really interesting. To clarify, for what a cannula is, I'm assuming it's the IV kind of needle that you'd have if you had like a bag.
Yeah, I'll quickly skip forward. Here we go. So this is something we'll get to later, but this is this is the cannula that's put together as the item, and yeah, it wouldn't function quite like this. Exactly. In a hospital, when they cannulate you, they do use a needle, but the needle is to open the skin so they can put a little rubber tube in, and of course the rubber tube is now a safe thing. It's not going to continue to pierce your skin like when it's in your arm. Because these are reusable, you can plug them in and out in a nice, gruesome, sort of salty fashion. You just stick the needle in, it just stays there. Technically functional, but like imagine if you wiggle that, you'd stab everything. So don't think about it too much.
You know, I really like this. Just to clarify my interpretation, it's sort of it makes me feel connections to like Yosefka's blood vial and Aliana's blood vials in Bloodborne 1. So I don't remember which does which, but one heals a larger amount of HP, one I think heals HP over time or something like that. So that I personally never use them much in Bloodborne 1 because they're so rare that they don't really stick in your memory. Like I don't even remember when I have them on me half the time when I do a playthrough. So the idea of instead getting those effects through an item, an intermediary item that you always have, that actually makes more sense to me because then you always know you have it, you always know that kind of heal is available, instead of being like, do I have Yosefka's on this run? I don't know. So I like that a lot, if I'm reading that the right way.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know, I could just be wrong on this. As far as I know, you only get 2 Yosefka's blood vials, because you get one when you first go, and then you can go back and like complete that story and get another.
If you
So
kill her when she's one of those goobers.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, exactly. It means that it's a cool idea, but you never really get to capitalize on it. And so here, I'm thinking that these are, whether this is practical, sort of in real life or not, you can hot swap them. So you basically choose to use them as you approach a combat situation. You're like, okay, there's like a ton of enemies here. I know I'm going to like need to heal sort of quickly, perhaps in the fight or something. So I'll choose something which allows me to heal quickly in case I'm about to die. Versus like one big enemy that you can be engaged with continuously, and you're like, okay, I'll go for the low and slow, heal right before I go in, so that I'm already like getting health back, and try and dispatch them quickly, and know that you won't need to like jump back to heal or something. So it's like you can make that choice ahead of time.
I like that because it's similar enough to the old game that it feels consistent, but different enough that you're introducing new mechanics to it.
Yeah.
And as far as practicality goes, it's not very practical to syringe yourself while being attacked by beasts already. So, so I think this is well within the realm of
Yeah,
for the game.
believability.
Yeah.
I'll do a no camera run.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. You could see how it would lead to the you never pick up this XY, you never use it, but so it's like all of the challenge runs that stem from that kind of idea. Yeah, so things here I also put out the chest to the left requires a heavy attack. Open it, yes, 10 saving. So in case you didn't notice the very, very tiny little chest here, I call it out just because I put the detail in, I might as well make it mean something. And I've also designed this weapon. So I didn't have a chance to do as many weapons as I'd like to, just because I like designing these weapons, it's good fun. But I wanted to make sure at least 1 or 2 of these like trick weapons were properly displayed in their full glory, so you can see how they function, what their one-handed versus two-handed uses are, and also it means I can put in some of the extra lore. So I'll go into that later. But in this case, I have a weapon. The trick weapons in the original game are all about how they switch between 2 forms, and so I just show it twice in its expanded form and its contracted form.
I have never seen anything like that where you have a blade and this kind of ripple squiggle area. That's it's kind of reminiscent of the serrated nature of the saw cleaver, but not quite because it's got that kind of roundness to it. I've never seen that.
It's a crazy one. So not specifically Aztec, obviously, but just through research into interesting weapons, like I found this, and it was described as something that maybe was used to sever the legs of a horse. So this is getting graphic, but the point being that you could incapacitate a horse or a knight on horseback or something. And I'm assuming that this is essentially functioning like a serration. So if you imagine you extend this out and then you pull back, so essentially, yeah, like it comes into contact and then the blade is in contact as you pull all the way down. It's kind of like, I don't know, gets through the skin, and then but at the end is just like a big swipe through the tendon. I don't know.
All right,
Yeah, cool. Regardless, very cool. And I was like, this actually makes a lot of sense because if they're fighting like big beasts, and
It also looks like it could have one of those complicated From Software hitboxes where different parts of the weapon do different damage or different kinds of damage. Like
exactly.
the middle of the sword could do slash damage, slash standard damage, and then technically the tip could do thrust damage because when you're swinging in that direction, very close to the end,
Absolutely.
going deep in. So yeah, that's dope.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think of that at all, but that would be really nice. And so you can like position yourself close or far away for the different effect. So moving on, we then have the first big boss fight. The thing to note here is that previously I had it just front on to the camera, which looks cool, it looks big and imposing, but I wanted to save that for a shot later on because like the big symmetry, like sort of perfect imposed, feels more like photography. That's carries weight with it that I wanted to save for a more important scene.
Yeah, you'll notice in a lot of formal compositions positions that are usually religious or have some kind of holy, I guess, vibe to it. There's gonna be a lot of symmetry, things are in the center. And if you look at Vicar Amelia or all these fights that you have in these altars, they use that. But it's kind of cool here to see the boss fight isn't supposed to convey that. It's just kind of this weird, gross, giant tick.
Yeah. Yeah, and
It's truly hideous.
I can't even imagine the reference you were looking at for these things.
Yeah.
Don't show them, please.
okay, cool. I'll quickly show you because I had a couple of stages on this. Something early on that I tried, something that maybe would make it feel bigger, was lighting from behind. Ultimately, I decided against it because whilst it was cool, it didn't have the mystery or the terrifying emerging from the darkness that I ended up with. For the process of putting it together, I was starting to fall back into my previous sort of habits of just filling everything with information and then pulling back. And this essentially I found is not good because I was trying to put all the information of the ticks back here and everything before then putting in the atmosphere, and that was just hampering my ability to actually capture the mood. What I need to do instead of trying to preserve all of this stuff with these ticks and the brick and all that kind of information that doesn't actually add any more to the scene because we've already got that stuff here. What I need to do is just push it back completely, make these silhouettes at most, and that means we can properly focus on unique elements of the scene. It's sure, I can make this chair stand out a bit more. I can obviously bring attention to the boss itself, and we get all the information that takes some brick wall and stuff on this side.
Is that a thumbprint texture on the boss?
It does look like that. It was actually the texture of a real tick
Oh god.
stack. So, but yeah, it was a cool one, so I kept it in and still blended it with other stuff.
I just want to note that in the previous version that you had, the weapon the player was holding was like a scorpion claw. Was that another trick weapon you were thinking of doing?
I'll show it. It comes up pretty soon. It was sort of another thing that kind of got cut 'cause I just couldn't work out how to make it work. But
it stood out to me as a cool idea.
yeah, it's a nice idea in theory, and I was like, how do I make this function? Anyway, so this is the piece here, and the nice details again are that you have now upgraded. You've got a new cannula, the forbidden cannula. You've got more
I just
blood
want to
sacks
say,
now.
forbidden cannula sounds like such a front thing. Just like the weird way that they name things, just as screw it. Lovecraft did whatever he wanted.
Absolutely.
That's really good.
And the
I'm very
best bit
curious
is,
as to why it's forbidden. Also,
I would say, and the best bit is it has bleeding.
Of course.
So yeah, and then I have the stamina and health increasing as you're leveling up. You're also just getting more blood echoes, and you've also gained insight at this point. So these numbers are going up. It's just nice to have that thing tick up and that sort of thing. So I also just have the name of the place you're in. Just adds a bit of context. It's nice.
You are a designer at heart.
And that's the thing. These elements are really exciting. It's sure, making the art is cool and it's big and epic, but these little extra bits which give you more information and make the world feel real, make it feel like a real game. It's just so exciting.
What comes across is that you're playing with this. It's very playful for you. You're exploring. It's very much like this undiscovered sandbox, like it's being a sand theme thing. And,
Hey.
It's interesting because I think it doesn't seem like you were under pressure to try to make something awesome for the sake of awesome. It seems like one of your goals was just, whether you know it or not, was to have fun with it, and that comes across so clearly.
I think it's a good point. So yeah, it's hard to say exactly what was going through my head, sort of in terms of the real intent behind it all, but I definitely did have a lot of fun. And it's the elements like this feel like they're more rewarding because they take less time to implement, but they sort of give so much more context to the image versus the illustration, which obviously does take quite a bit longer and really serves a single purpose, which it always has. It needs to look cool.
Were there parts, and it might be something in a piece we see later on, were there parts that felt like they were just a chore and you didn't really want to do, and didn't really need to be done anyway, kind of thing? Or was like everything kind of cohesive in terms of production?
I would say that was the over detailing of scenes like this, that I was like, oh, this is taking ages. I just wasn't realizing that I didn't need that information. I just needed to get rid of it. And there's a piece later on which I think really exemplifies, because it's the last image I did, exemplifies almost my learning process across this project. So,
Yeah, we can also talk about what you learned.
absolutely, yeah. Another little detail, you got the tendon saver, I've done the art for it, just slap it in. That's it's a nice,
Free transform.
exactly. So it's a nice just way to keep it contiguous. And,
Oh my god.
yeah, you have to drain the sack. So, okay, I'll quickly go into this because it's not law specific. It's more just sort of ideas for game design. I have no idea if all this stuff would work out when you actually made it into a game, but the ideas are fun. You go into the boss fight, you've got this huge thing, you're like, oh god, how am I going to do this? You start attacking it and you realize it heals itself after you attack it. Great. You're also surrounded by a bunch of the little entities that are just swarming you. So, like, in typical sort of FromSoft fashion, you start attacking the boss and you feel like, I'm fucked. This is going to be a horrible fight. And then, you experiment with a couple of things. You realize if you run around the back and attack it, its blood sac, like, it clearly does damage, and like it bursts and rivers of blood spurt out. And it's like, oh great, I'm making some progress. The slight caveat is that the blood is toxic, so you have to attack and then dodge to make sure you're not like covered in toxic blood. Cool. And so you're like, oh, I'm making progress now. It's healing less quickly now as I attack it, and also it's clearly getting closer to like an end point. The stack's getting smaller. Great. But at some point you realize that as it gets smaller, it gets a lot more nimble too, and so it's a lot faster now, and can dodge and attack you faster. So it's like, shit, the fight's actually getting more difficult again. And all this sort of like back and forth, I just thought was really fun. So at some point you attack it enough, its blood sac like drains completely. It lets out some big shriek, all the little XD to run away, and then you essentially fight its second phase. So at this point, yeah, it's far faster than the original. It is now weaker and it has less health. It can't regenerate, but also it can dodge and attack you more quickly. And it also uses like this big whip attack. So before it might just sort of stab you with its mouth parts, but now it splits open. It's got like this long area of attack whip thing that will like whip out and then pull you in, which I just thought would be like a fun and terrifying boss attack to happen. So yeah, you're aware of that. And eventually, you kill it, and hundreds of baby Exodida will crawl out from her carcass. Lovely. But the important thing is it drops the glass cannon, so that's the weapon you get. And if you attack it,
Oh shit, am I out of lead on this one? Oh yeah.
Obviously, it's just like the name of the
Give me a second to pull this lead out.
I was just gonna say it's so awesome how much detail you put in terms of
There we go.
gameplay, and I can only imagine just how fun this game would be to play. Just
Right.
looking at the drawings and your descriptions of them.
And an interesting thought is like, yeah, imagine what the player experiences with it. So, as I sort of mentioned, it's kind of like a bit of a roller coaster of emotions. It's like, it feels insurmountable, then it's like, oh, this is possible, and then it gets harder. It's just like a fun
Shit.
playing with the players' sort of expectations. And also, how might you then tackle this the second time? Well, now that you know the boss, like the little Exceeder disappear after it gets to the second stage, you can go in with maybe the right type of weapon, quickly attack the back of it so it does the shriek, and then it's like, that gets rid of the little ones. So you can know that it's safe to just run on the back, smash it to bits. And if you've got toxic resistant armor or something, then you don't have to worry about the gushes of blood. So it's like, there's all these opportunities that allow a second playthrough, or even just a second attempt, to be optimized, which is a really fun thing to sort of imagine from a player point of view. So, yeah, drops the midwest cannula. Despite being alluded to earlier on, and I've described the mechanics for it, this is the first time you see it as an item. But yeah, this is the cannula, it shows it's exactly what it is. One detail I didn't put in the entire submission is I never drew the cannula on the player's arm in any of the scenes. Just didn't.
I think we could forgive that.
I know, such a shame, but it would have been a nice one. Anyway, this stuff is referencing stuff in the original game. It's quite lore important, but we'll get back to it later. And I've described Canada does already. But again, something like this, the image itself here, because it's like a small part of a bigger image, it is much faster to do than like a full painting, but it feels like it adds just as much value. So spending the time to make this sort of crisp and polished and really feel like it could absolutely just go straight into the game, I felt like it was worth it to me. So cool. That was nice. But yeah, you can say possibly. Don't need to go into it in too much detail, but a trick weapon does some cool stuff. It just mimics the attack, so it shoots out the barbed whip, pulls the enemy in, and then if you've got a drip cannula, so referencing the real medical use of a cannula where it's like constantly feeding you an antibiotic or saline or something, the idea is that if you've got the right cannula equipped, use the special attacker's weapon, you can drain enemies' health. Nice.
Cool.
So that's a fun thing that you can do, and there's a couple other weapons which sort of imply that it might do the same thing. And again, everything's blood themed. It's just a nice way to keep it like fully on theme, on brand with Bloodborne.
It's very on brand. It's very
Yeah.
So
the poor enemy being impaled on the rightmost diagram.
I didn't even notice the brownie face.
it's but yeah, you can see how it would be a cool weapon to use, and it's got like all that fun motion. This stuff is just simple motion blur, but it adds so much to making it feel real.
Yeah, I could hear it.
Yeah, and you get like a big clunk and clang as it like the metal parts move. Maybe like a fleshy squish as it stabs through.
Yeah, it ties in with like, hey, this is your reward for beating that boss. Now you get to kind of. It's a very negative thing, honestly.
Absolutely, yeah. Because it feels so much better. So if you haven't just progressed in terms of story or whatever, you've got a cool toy to play with now.
Yeah, the immediate toy reward is about as good as it gets.
Yeah. So yeah, moving on. The
Big flips.
exactly. So throughout the game, just like in the first, you've got like the blood moon progressing in the first game. It gets closer and closer to the full red blood moon. That looks epic. Instead here we're progressing closer to an eclipse. I just thought it was a really nice way to theme it, to be in line with the first game. Obviously it also has meaning to the story, but in this case it meant for essentially just changing the sky a little bit and then doing some interesting color passes and stuff over the image to switch it up. Because I had, yeah, exactly. It's like you get a totally different mood now, and because I had all the enemies on layers, I could get rid of those, put some blood in, something's happened, put a different enemy type in. Small edits, but it makes for a new image.
That's one of my favorite parts of Bloodborne, where you revisit an area and then you're completely shocked because now the enemies that are there are so much more difficult. The level feels so much more threatening, and everything about this image says that.
Exactly, and it just makes it's like using the same space twice. It's a very efficient thing. It's something that games should certainly aim to do a lot because you get more from the content you create. And certainly from my point of view, I was to get as much as I could from the work I put in already. And this was a great way to do that.
It's like when a classical piece or something makes an allusion to a thing or a theme, it brings it back, and while it might save time and save money, it's also just beautiful to listen to or look at.
Yeah, it's a really good one, actually.
Yeah, it feels analogous to Bloodborne 1 being in Yarborough the first time around after you go to Hypodian jail, as opposed to after you've beaten Rom, going to unseen village and everything is like deeply messed up. That's sort of the vibes that I'm getting from this.
Yeah, absolutely. In the same way, I allude to the fact that the insight mechanic just does more for making enemies difficult, but it's something that ticks up throughout the game, so you're also like seeing more spooky stuff. Yeah, so that's that. This is just some ideas that I thought would be worth including anyway. It essentially alludes to the fact that throughout the game you've been finding other weapons. So I never got a chance to really develop these. I chucked them in anyway, Vince's years. That's what you saw in the previous concept.
Yeah.
I couldn't find a good way to make it work particularly, but I put it in there anyway. Ceremonial pick, just something that is either like a standard sort of blade, but then poke it out sideways and making sort of like a piercing weapon where you swing it at people. This is the thing you saw in the first image, the Makwakitu. Like, I looked up
How
and,
do you pronounce that? Wow.
yeah, Makwakitu. That isn't a properly Aztec
Oh,
weapon. It's
come
like
on.
the
Let's
Yeah,
one
focus.
people know.
wooden. I think like those wooden swords that they use.
Yeah, they describe it as a club, but it's covered with like shards of obsidian.
Yeah,
And
that's such a cool thing to draw a reference from. I've seen a couple, I think recreations in museums. I don't know if I've seen a real one, but they're very brutal looking weapons. Specific.
absolutely, yeah. And like they tell me about the sort of thing that's gonna like cause a bunch of bleed damage. So again, on brand.
Nice.
And then above, just a really cool weapon that I came across, the Urumi, which is just like this long, it's sheet of metal essentially, presumably sharp on both sides. And I found a bunch of videos of people doing it kind of like as a performance, and they like whip it around super fast and jump over it and do all this crazy stuff. I feel like it could be a fun thing to sort of half whip, half sword. You can use to kind of like perhaps do some sort of defensive move, and I don't know what to call it. So beaching early, perhaps it also lets you steal health from enemies.
Cool. I just want to point out again the presentation here has that really nice vibe of old school sketches of travelers who kind of sketch ideas that they're looking at.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because it looked like it had sort of been sketched in by hand instead of going with the font, which I chose specifically because it looked like the original Bloodborne font. I just put in a font I found as a font somewhere, something that made it look like it was hand drawn, because otherwise it just didn't match. It felt very strange to have literal paper book, hand drawn ink sketches, and then like this perfectly kerned and what was it called, serif font. It just didn't make sense. So yeah, a small change, but worth paying attention to in this case. Anyway, so describes what's happened, puts in extra information about as you're going through the city when it's slightly darker, you hear more things, the NPCs talking to you, things like that. Voices like where there were just murmurs behind the door before, and now you've got full conversations to have, and a little more information about mechanics to do with how like the dodging is now kind of an extended version of parry, so perfectly timed dodges cause an enemy to stagger and stuff like that. So interesting things. It's kind of like I don't have to show any visuals for this stuff. I can just describe it and flashes some of that stuff out. It also describes the cannon usage. You would switch around with the D-pad just to make sure it's always on hand, and that's what lets you sort of specifically use a cannon for each fight. So in the same way you might switch between weapons before going into a combat scenario, you would switch between cannons too. And then we get to a big awesome scene. So quickly before I go into it, specifically, this is the image I was referring to when I learned lessons from the previous one about over detailing, and I was like, I already know going into this that a bunch of it's going to be in shadow. So why would I put detail there only to get rid of it? Let's just like make sure I get the important stuff in and then just let the rest of it disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And that worked. It made for making this image quite a bit faster than it would have otherwise been. And yeah, I think it feels very effective too.
Great
So-
hero shot. Love it. I also love that you posed the hunter in the classic Bloodborne pose for this one. It feels very I like that illusion just for the straight up iconic pose. Really everything about it feels moon presency. The people worshiping right before it feels like when you're going towards Orphan of Kaz at the end of the Hunter's Nightmare. I mean, a lot of great illusions there. I love this thing. This is so cool. And look, you don't have any healing, and you're low on health.
Oh no, I love that you saw that because that's the first thing I was going to say. It's like my favorite detail is that you've run out of health and you're about to die, and
You're a son of a bitch.
you've only just made it. You just about made it to the lowest level of morale.
Oh my
and
god.
You're found the big bad. I love that you saw that. Love that.
I also
Skill
want
stuff.
and I also want to say the even if we haven't like heard the straight up lore download, the images are very explicit. I think in trying to communicate it again, like From does. That is their style. Like things are specific enough that the mind knows like, well, there's got to be something here. Like the fact that there's water here where there's nowhere else, lost ocean. Just like Karma, I have my own guess as to what's going on here, which is
Mm.
that's not to be taken lightly. That's actually a very hard thing to draw out of a viewer. Most things don't make you care enough to want to guess anyway. So that's great.
Yeah, it's like presenting you with things that you haven't seen yet. So it's a bunch of new things at once. It's clearly important, and it's got stuff which, whether you knew what was going on or not, whether you read the text or not, you can at least make some link. You saw the sand draining away earlier. Now you see where the sand's draining to, and all of these things. So it pieces it together. Because this is the most sort of essentially important moment. This is where I chose to have a symmetrical composition because that was the one that deserved it essentially. So other notes in the composition, it's a great image of describing what I've been calling checkerboarding with how you use light and shadow. And essentially, that's just if you've got a light chunk next to a dark chunk, if an object is standing on top, you can then make this pop out and making sure that the light extends up through it. And then, almost like on a checkerboard, as soon as this shadow ends, I can just switch to shadow to make the rest of this figure stand out still.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be careful. Yeah, you've got to be careful that this doesn't feel contrived. But in this case, the lighting is already, I guess you could describe it as contrived. It's very curated, and it works perfectly. You don't really notice it the first time, but it keeps the silhouette of this character, despite going across very high contrast background, very clear, and that's really nice. Again, you noticed already, but this is based on the cover art of the original. So I just wanted the same pose. This is the striking hunter pose, even though they're in different attire. It's supposed to just, really nail that this is a Bloodborne game. Make no mistake. Even though it's bright orange instead of like dark blues and greens. It's very much Bloodborne. And as far as making it look important without even knowing what's going on, because it's essentially composed, and it's like you can tell something's happened here. There's blood dripping down. It's like that doesn't just happen. Something's happened here, and there's like a clear focus. Everything's looking at this single point. So this is probably quite important. And yeah, that's all I can say on this image at the moment. Anyway, so cool. Fingers crossed. I mean, I feel like successfully.
Everybody else, like seriously.
I think you definitely need to send him his videos in some way because the amount, I mean, just looking at it on face value, you get a lot out of it, but hearing you describe it and reading the passages is another level.
There is a lot more beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And Body will read it all, or his judges, they seem very thorough, very, very thorough about whatever amount of work you do, they will look at all of it.
Yeah.
It seems, from what it looks like from the outside when he posts the win videos and all that, it really looks like they actually pay attention and care. So
It's great because they do like a reading of the law as when they introduce the entry. And I mean, I sort of just can't wait to like hear his voice.
it's
Just describe it, right? It would be so
Did you
cool.
submit it already?
That's the dream.
Did you submit this already, or is it?
Yeah, it's been submitted. It's about 2.5 weeks since submission, but I mean, there's got to be a lot of entries to go through and edit, videos edit. So
it must take so long. It must take so long.
I don't envy him. 1 second, I'm just gonna message to make sure I don't get interrupted because.
So, all the three of us need to send it to Body, and then there won't be a competition, and then that'll be it. It'll be over really quickly.
That's hope for that. That'd be nice. Real quick, just a message. Cool, that's good. All right, so we can continue. So then, now we've got like the full transition in terms of to the eclipse. Again, a nice image to make. I've got rid of all the creatures that they're not important anymore. What's happening is what's crazy stuff is in the sky. So I've taken the rest of the sort of distractions away. There's the hint that like from the beginning where it felt like the town was dead and lost. Well, there's actually still stuff living here, still things because you can talk to people. Sort of implies that they're sort of somehow coming back, or at least becoming more present somehow. That sort of ties into maybe the lore reasons, but it's just a nice change. And so this would be like your last journey through this area towards the boss fight at the end, and a detail that I could have put in but forgot. I didn't show that the chest has been opened. Oh, that's a shame. Oh well.
It's invalid.
You know.
You should rescind your signature.
I'm only human. Anyway, and then this is
Person just did a no chest run.
just exactly. They just never picked up the pendants over.
This shot.
So the end there. Here's the final shot.
Oh, the great one's nightmare. Oh, it's so enticing. Please.
Yeah. So here we go. I just wanted to make this clear as possible. Obviously, we're fighting the great one that you just seen before. We've got the big epic mood setting. The eclipse is fully in the sky. In the same way that you see this really cool shot of the moon presence descending from the blood moon. I didn't have the same sort of descending from the sky, but originally I had the eclipse kind of maybe this size over in this portion of the image. And originally I was like, yeah, it's the standard kind of triangle composition. You've got the focal point here, the character, and then the eclipse is going on. But it felt very separate. It felt like it wasn't part of the action. It was just sort of like mood setting. And I wanted it to be very explicit that in the same way the moon presence is linked to the moon, this great one, which I'm calling fauna, in the same way that the moon presence is called flora. Fauna is very much from the eclipse, or at least connected to it. When the eclipse is there, the sun present or the eclipse present, or whatever you call it. I didn't end up writing that because it felt a bit wordy, but it's here as well. So linking those two together just made it feel that much stronger, and it made sense to then have this huge eclipse in the sky, which obviously works very well in this image too. This did pose problems for composition. Everything's dark. I've got like a largely sort of black character against a sky which is supposed to be black with just like a ring of light. So there's a lot of contrivance going on in terms of lighting. Where's all this blue fog coming from? Doesn't matter. The point is,
It can't matter. You gotta make the picture. It's all
exactly.
Yeah.
There's no way to make the image without it. So instead I was sort of happy to just let that sort of stuff slide and really focus on just making the image feel epic from your first read. You're in a nightmare too. So like you said before, in the same way that I've put a lot of like interesting lighting effects in their environments, I totally had free rein to just do whatever I wanted to make it themed nicely. And yeah, you're no longer in the waking world here in the Great One's Nightmare. So this sort of stuff, you can do whatever you want with it.
Dark pictures are really hard. Yeah, you got to do whatever it takes. It looks very complete for such a dark picture. And yeah, like you said, I mean, even when you're running around in any From game, or I guess I'm thinking specifically Bloodborne and Dark Souls, it's like there's contrived lighting everywhere, right? There's like local light sources that are coming from nothing, like the emitters are turned off. They're just there to light a corner or to get like a temperature difference from one side of an object to another. But those light sources aren't necessarily coming from anywhere. They're just like a stylistic, like make it clear to the player thing.
And that's the thing. The first read then feels so much more engaging because of it. So stuff in this image, obviously the same architecture that I've shown from Moran already. It's a different place in the upper levels of Moran, but we've got like the cool temples and stuff. A more explicit sort of Aztec reference there, just because I thought it would be good to get a little bit of that in, but the rest of it is just architecture that we've seen previously. The player in this case, literal black silhouette. I didn't have time to do anything more, but I also have already learnt my lesson of like, I don't actually need to detail it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's a good lesson to learn. Up here, just a few of these like nice little glowing bits. It sort of links back a little bit to Briatus, the Door of the Cosmos, like the sort of more alien look in the design. I wanted to make sure it wasn't referencing the moon presence completely. It was like a sort of a mix between the two. And also it offers that very nice contrast with the sort of pinkish red in the back. And otherwise it's a pretty simple image. It's just I'm doing as much as I can to make it feel really intense and interesting. Got a lot of effects. In this case, you've just entered a fight, so you have 4 health, but you have just dodged backwards, and so you have less. So he's done a dodge, and you've got like this big swoop as the arms sort of come across. I think this could have been more effective, but a composition to really focus on like the swipe of an enemy would have been completely different to this, and I really just wanted to make sure that was cool.
And as you get
just want to like state the rate for the record, that would probably be cut a lot of emails.
High, very high.
Very high. Because you're already working as a professional.
Indeed. Yeah, that's a very good point. Anyway, something else that I was aware of when I added the UI in is that it was too bright and it just took away from the scene. So that's something to be aware of. Absolutely break the rules on like pre-established UI. I took the verticals and insight thing away. It was just extra confusion up in this portion of the image. We don't need it. And I've made this is like half the opacity it used to be. Same with the stuff at the top. It just needs to be lessened. Of course, you picked the Queen's Canyon in the previous image, so now you've got that equipped, and you've got maximum number of sex because you're just going into a boss fight. And then, pardon?
No, it's a joke. Because you can get plus for your, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, damn. See, I missed out on it anyway. So then we've got the final screen which describes everything that got you to that place, what happens when you go to the altar, a little item description that I just didn't have time to put into its own item screen, but it doesn't matter too much because it's only a small bit. And then descriptions of the ending, and then the alternate ending. And that's it. That is the piece.
Wait, I want to read the whole thing, give me a second.
And
Still haven't finished the first Bloodborne.
oh,
So I get to experience all that, and then I don't know. It's fun to think about this as a possibility for another game.
yeah, I'm familiar with the first game's endings. And also, are you concerned about spoilers?
I guess I'll probably say spoiler one at the beginning of this video when I do the intro. I've already seen all the endings and all the more stuff, so
Yeah, the game's been out for a while anyway, so it's not like it has.
I'm sure anyone who's still trying to hold out would know not to watch something about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, the whole intro to this kind of spoils the good ending anyway, so you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's immediately. I mean, if you didn't know it existed, then you'd be like, what the hell's going on? But,
yeah, you just wake up from the dream, right?
you just wake up and
Yep.
Cool. So that's gone through the first part, I guess, describing my general approach to it. Shall we jump into some deep lore?
Well, I just want to say, great job on all the art, Thomas. It was
that's
it was incredible. I hope everybody who some amount of people are going to be like, all right, I'm not sticking around for lore, but I hope that they really love the art because just on its face, it feels, even if you don't have any connections to past lore stuff, the kind of story that it's trying to tell, the pieces as a whole feel very cohesive and make their point super clearly, and just really do a great job of communicating. So just big kudos to you. Super props.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I suppose last thoughts on that as a whole. Looking at all the images at once is again a great way to just get an idea for the ebb and flow of your entry. So at the end, I was thinking, how do I organize these images? Because there's places where I've switched around the order, and you can see I kind of group areas where it demands your attention to read and then sort of digest like stuff that's not happening in the moment separately. I've kind of grouped them together so that you have, say, your like item description with some info about what's just happened. Again, an item description thing with a weapon, and this just sort of meant it felt a little less like whiplash between the two sides that I was presenting. Because initially I could have sort of been like, okay, you start the game and you get some blood sacks, and it immediately shows you the blood sack thing. And it's like, okay, cool. But it's much nicer to show this full sequence because you get to experience this all together. It's much closer to sort of the visual experience you have playing something like this. And so just keeping all of that in mind, if it's not perfectly chronological, but it feels like it flows better in terms of how it's delivering information to whoever's viewing it, I think that's always more important. So,
Also, nice variety of images, like lighter ones at the beginning, mid-tone ones, things that have more of a dusk feeling, going all the way to like totally dark, nighttime, scary. Nice, just overall variety when you look at them all at thumbnails. It doesn't feel like it's the same beat being hit over and over again.
yeah, and some of that is deliberate, but a lot of that kind of came naturally. It's like I would have probably thought to put it in deliberately if it wasn't happening itself, but because I already had this idea of progressing sunset, like that naturally means I'm going from light to dark across the period of the game. So some of it happens for you, but absolutely keeping that in mind is great, because otherwise you may just miss out on the chance to do it. And something I also described in some of the descriptions is how, like, the lower down you go, so essentially the further you progress, the sand sort of becomes more like a blood red sand rather than bright yellow, and those sort of things. They kind of show through in images like this, and we do get darker and more red until the end, where it's just like black and red, basically. Versus the beginning, where we've got like white and red almost. So it's like this nice opposite from where you started.
That progression is really effective. And just with these images alone as key scenes, if they were kept together in a trailer, I think many people would be very excited to play this game.
Yeah, I guess I suppose that also touches another point. If you're going to do something which exemplifies like an entire project, absolutely make sure you pick the things that are the most interesting. Like, you may always think, yeah, I'll show the final boss, but the moment before the final boss, that's just as cool. Like, and maybe not as obvious. It wouldn't immediately occur to you, but just the way that you approach the bosses in the Souls games, or the Soulsborne games, they always stage them in such interesting ways, and it's easy to forget that kind of thing if I guess you're not doing the research beforehand to work out what they've already done and why it works so well. So yeah, just a good tip to sort of remain mindful of that sort of stuff.
Cool. So I think from here, lovely images, great everything, as Stephen said. We could dive into that Miro board, and I think that's where you have the lore stuff. And if you wanted to just run us through that, I'm sure we'd all love to kind of hear the story beats that you had in mind.
Absolutely. So this was probably the most important part of my board, is these aspects. To keep, like, every time I go back in and read a bit, I sort of scan through to make sure I'm hitting these parts, and then I basically extend that out to ideas that could take me to our Instagram. So I took this one little line here, so this red one from earlier. I just copied that over and started to work out what this might mean. So this led to random ideas, which are almost like high-level ideas that don't have too much direct connection yet. And so, yeah, we have the potential for a prequel, maybe time travel there. And then I could sort of briefly run that through my mind and see, like, what vibe do I get from this, and what potential is there, and what doesn't work about it. And clearly this worked for me. I immediately had like a little burst of ideas that could work, and these were just the three endings and where that could have taken you. So if I want the first game to feel important, and essentially I want to make sure it's a prequel and it makes sense after one of the endings. I can't have it happen after all of the endings, because that would imply a sort of something which is quite separate to the events of the first game. Sure, it may be chronological, but it feels like it doesn't matter whether you did X or Y in the first game. And since the third ending is the most difficult one to get, essentially, it's the most fulfilling, it gets you to the most interesting space, I'm taking that to be the canon one. So that gives you some things to sort of start with. If I want that to feel engaging and meaningful, well, that means I want the Infinite Great One to play a part in the second story. You could play it as the Great One. Well, possibly, but that might just stray too far away, be a bit too alien. Perhaps it would work if you made an entire game, like people may enjoy it, but trying to convince you that it would feel good to play as a Great One in just visual images, I thought would be too challenging and sort of too out there for a contest like this. So
I love that you're actually writing out your realistic crits of your own ideas. I think that's very good practice.
It's really useful, because otherwise you just forget and you look back and go, wait a second, why didn't I go with that? You know, that sounds cool on the face of it, and if you don't have a reason why not, you can get kind of like it's getting rid of the mental blockers. I mean, to be honest, isn't that stuff about just essentially your approach to art in general and the tricks your mind will play on you to prevent you from doing the stuff you know you want to do. Yeah, writing things down is the best way to like break that barrier. So I have all of these different places that it could go through. I think ultimately I take this part. So continually cause a new event to happen, and I then start to draw in aspects of the law. So there's the description about how every great one loses its child and yearns for a surrogate. We now have a baby great one. I was like, put the two together. Maybe there's a great one that's a bit unhappy and it would like to have a baby. Wouldn't that be cute? Perhaps a slight departure from the general depressing tone of most Soulsborne games, but the undercurrent, the stories that are underneath the game I'm proposing is almost have this nice like Hollywood happy ending, kind of. So it's slightly different, but it actually draws, I think, quite accurately from all the stuff that happened in the first game. So I think it's arguably quite a nice extension. And I like it to have a slightly happier edge because that just suits me, I think. It ties a nice bow on it. This would be the second game and the last game. It would solve the problems to some extent. So yeah, through this route there's links to Laurent. Specifically there's the description of the bust of Laurent, which is that little like shriveled looking sort of infant thing, but it describes how it's cursed and it was found in alien Laurent. And it's called
annoying chalice dungeon material.
Oh really? Is it quite rare?
It drives me. It's at a point in the chalice dungeon where you just need so many materials to progress that it's just this list of like, really I have to get these guys again, all 5 of these guys, come on.
It's just like grinding again, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, their name is very interesting because it implies a legitimate birth. So that sort of triggered a lot of memory of reading about the Ring of Betrothal, which is talking about how a queen would sort of wear the ring to represent wedlock with the Great One that had committed those later to bear a special child. So perhaps all of the Bastards of Laurent are a result of them being illegitimate, as in a child born outside of wedlock with a Great One. Again, sort of like these are links that there's nothing sort of stated in the original game, but there's multiple little more descriptions which feel like they could fit together. So perhaps we have Laurent, which is I can't remember exactly why I settled on that as a place, but I think it's just because it felt like the most intriguing. There's just enough hints to it that make it feel like it's a big expansive place, but there's also not enough to make it feel too limiting or too much like it's been explored already. And now I've got these sort of ideas with the Bastards of Laurent mixing with the Ring of Betrothal. An idea is starting to form.
I like that connection a lot. That's cool.
Yeah. So this lays the groundwork. I now have Laurent that we know was lost to the sands. We know that it was, I can't remember exactly where this is from, again another description, but we know it was the first place to suffer the scourge of the beast. Because it's the first place, I extrapolated that to being the origin of the scourge of the beast. That's really just like, why not? There's nothing that counteracts that idea, and then that leads me to have a story that I can make from it. And yeah, Bastards of Laurent exist in space, so something happened that caused a bunch of Bastards of Laurent to exist because you collect quite a few in the main game. There sort of feels like there should be a justification, and it provides that nice justification. So I started to work out roughly what might have happened to get to the present state of Laurent, and then I was working out roughly what will happen in the game for events to happen that feel meaningful and get to some sort of result. The stuff up here, this is really just me noting interesting like tidbits, things that I think might come into use. I don't think a lot of them did. For example, I have quite a lot of stuff to do with the Temerians, like which ones exist in the game and what they do in the game and the lore. It ultimately didn't matter too much. I kind of ignored it. But these are really just things that I I made sure I kept track of because they felt like they were interesting things that pointed in a direction that wasn't explained. So it's like feels inspiration when you read it almost, and this is kind of just like a gut feeling. It's like, oh, that's cool, but also unknown. So it's something I can work with. Whereas when it describes something that is cool but also expanded on, that's not something I can work with. So a good example is that I don't make really any references to the actual church, the Vatican Church, because that's Yarnum specific. That's all stuff that's happened after Moran, and it sort of it feels separate, and it's really well expanded already. You've got the three divisions of it.
Okay, where we at? Where we at?
Motivations and stuff. It's really cool.
Sorry,
But referencing that would make it feel like it's
friend just came out of
really
nowhere,
sort of stuck in the first game's world, and
messaging me.
but all the things that are
It's
external
curious.
to those events, that's where I could draw inspiration from.
Here's one good call there. I think that was a very good call.
Cool. So yeah, and then speaking of that, here's one thing that Boston Brown has linked to it. It describes the harbinger of curses, and elsewhere curses. I think it's the Chalice Dungeon description. It says how like curses are brought down by the great ones or something. I might have the actual description somewhere, but it implies that the great ones are the origins of curses. Curses are used to hex individuals or something like that. That's their function in the game. But because that's described as a curse, and multiple times the Scourge of the Beast is described as a curse, I'm like, maybe again I do a little put the two together. A great one is the source of the Scourge of the Beast. Perhaps it cursed humanity with it after humanity did something that they weren't too pleased with. That sort of aligns with how Cos was like a curse of the fishing hamlet and things because of the atrocities that happened there. So it starts to feel consistent and also like it's drawing from pretty reasonable links that existed in this place. One thing that I liked as an idea but I couldn't execute on. I don't know if you remember that sketch I had earlier where it showed like that big sort of squishy thing in the ceiling. I was wanting to do a heart of Moran, so like another sort of squishy amalgamation creature, because I was reading exactly because there are theories and stuff discussing about how the brain of Mensis is assumed to be the school of Mensis. They did the ritual, they all died. You see all of them in their like head cages and things, but the brain of Mensis sort of feels like it's probably just like an amalgamation of all of their consciousnesses into this big, disgusting, evil thing.
It sort of feels important, even if it's hard to put a finger on it. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, ooh, it could be cool to do a similar thing here. And with Iran as like a whole population, perhaps that could have been like an interesting way to create something which was, instead of like the pursuit of knowledge, it was like the pursuit of a nice thing, something that comes from the heart, compassion perhaps. And so they fuse into this big, poor heart creature. The other idea which I couldn't execute on was like it would be fun to have a boss that is covered in ticks, which is like weakening it actively. But you could do something beforehand to like get rid of the ticks, and then the boss becomes a lot stronger because it's not like hampered by that. So it could have just been like an interesting idea that could have taken somehow, but ultimately didn't have time for. So yeah, back to the board. Essentially, that roughly describes where I'm getting all these ideas from. I wanted an equivalent to the moon presence. So, what's cooler than a blood moon? Solar eclipse. It's a bit of a bigger solar event. It's rarer. It also looks cool. Great. I could extrapolate from that. The first game is set about seeking the pale blood. I could put like seek the ring of blood or something. Something which is again a vague reference to the visual of the eclipse, which in my case, instead of going white, I went for obviously red. It should look sort of themed. And so, in the same way, it's like, seek this thing is analogous with this great one, just like it is in the first game. It just felt like a nice sort of mirror of it, a nice parallel. Something worth pointing out that I didn't before, it has a ring of betrothal on, because I could.
Oh, it's mirrors. I had noticed the ring, but I didn't know it was the ring of betrothal. That's a good detail.
It requires quite a bit of zooming in, but who knows?
I knew it was a ring, and I meant to ask, but it just slipped my mind. And after we moved past it,
Yeah. And so this is the sort of research into here, just finding interesting words and associations with it. You just Google and like read Wikipedia and then read historical references to it. It starts to give you just fun ideas of like how historians have referenced it through time, and then all of this stuff. This is just like a really nice chunk of text I found somewhere that was describing how past civilizations saw it and what they thought it was. We've got all these fun things like star demons eating the sun, insects or snakes. Like these are just little tidbits that came from this chunk of text, and it's about how the Aztecs like thought of these solar events, which could be taken in very cool ways. So all of this stuff, it's kind of just it's more of the like blue sky research, just finding interesting references that I could take forward. Didn't use too much of it in the end, but it's a great place to start. And also, I think the reason people thought Aztec might be the setting is just because their culture was so ingrained in like blood sacrifice and all that fun stuff. So it was an immediate fit for Bloodborne. So yeah, and then we go to this. This is where I just work out exactly what happened in the game, and this is very fun. Largely before I did any drawing, maybe when I was doing the sketches at the same time, I would just work out things that I wanted in the game and then extrapolated on it. So the
what
first
a
game,
mark for how hard you should work.
yeah,
How long did you work on this again? How long did you say it took since you started on it to submission?
so we had a month. So for me, I was like, okay, I've got like 4 or 5 weekends and whatever I can do in the evenings. And the problem was I hadn't planned for the fact that I was actually busy for 2 of those weekends. So that suddenly put a big strain on what I could do.
It's a pretty
This in a month?
it's a
Yeah,
pretty
it's
tight
crazy.
deadline, and then I think a lot of people on that deadline they would have been like, I can't plan, I can't make a huge board and actually write out what I want to do. Like, you gotta plan it, and damn, any amount of time you can spend writing out, just writing good content, right? Like this all comes down to content creation before pictures, before layout. It's content creation. What is the actual meat, the actual content of what's going on? It's like enough can't be said about actually taking the time to write that out and make that real.
Absolutely. And the other thing is I didn't know the scope of the project really until I'd done this. So I kind of had no idea how much I wanted to make until I had come up with the ideas of things I wanted to make. That sounds like a very obvious sentence, but it really did it blossomed out of enjoying brainstorming in this sheet, completely separate from visual art. And then obviously I then just wanted to try and represent as much of this as possible with visuals. So this is where I made a little gameplay node, and this meant I could just write out stuff where I liked mechanics from the original game and I wanted to innovate on them. So how do I innovate in the healing? Well, I ended with the blood sacks and cannulas. All that seemed to fit because I was looking at what sort of stuff might exist in the desert, what kind of creatures are there, and what things would just be a nice departure from the wolf sort of inspired beast of the first game. So it's like if I go from like insectoid, like exoskeletons and pincers and stuff like that, things like the scorpions and insects felt like a nice departure from that. So it meant that everything would feel sort of similarly horror-esque with the merging with animal reference, but it wasn't the same beasts that we've been fighting in the first game over and over. So I think with that, I was sort of brainstorming all this stuff. It's nice because having written the things out here, at some point I was just copying chunks of this into the text descriptions I have in the final presentation, and then just rewording it to make it flow. So it made that final step of bringing it all together really easy. I was just finding the bits from here, copying them into Photoshop, easy peasy. So that was really nice. It meant that I didn't have to try and write all of that in one chunk at the end. And then I wanted the doll. The thing the first game does amazingly, and all of FromSoft's games seem to do, is that it explains why you can die and come back to life. Very few games do this and make a deal about it. Like the first game I really loved for that Undertale. It doesn't explain like sort of a mechanic in the world sort of as to why you should be coming back to life and stuff, but it then expands on the consequences of you dying and coming back, and what that means for a story. that's awesome. It's like the sort of the meta aspect, but it also makes sense for the in-game stuff. From something really goes meta with it. They never goes, you just died, time to reload your save, kind of thing. Instead, it goes for any wild reason. And in this case, it's that your consciousness is bound to the dream, and so if you die, it's just a physical thing. Your consciousness goes back to the dream. That's where you're being sustained. Cool. Well, you ended the dream in the first game, so where are you with developing the second game? I just went with the easy option. New dream. Call it a different name, The Hunter's Reverie. In this case.
I think it makes perfect sense. Or just to quickly ask you, do you think the pillars in the distance in the Hunter's dream are other dreams? Do you know where you lie on that theory?
I sort of yes, I would say I would go with that because of like in the same way that your dream has like all the graves of maybe previous players. That's
Yeah.
kind of the idea of like these are all hunters that were controlled by other players and stuff.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I feel like there's more. I feel like it makes sense if there's more than one dream.
Yeah.
When Eileen tells you like, yeah, say hi to the little doll for me after she kills you,
Mhm.
it's like that. It feels like there could be more than one doll. It feels like this whole thing could be being instanced. It feels like being a hunter is like an experience that's not necessarily monolithic. Like there can be multiple versions of it going on.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went down a rabbit hole.
No, that's a good point. I think yeah, my interpretation, at least of how it fits into this, would be that there's still only one hunter at a time, probably, but I'm not sure. I think that could go either way. Definitely the fact that like cycles of hunters is basically just all the different players. But yeah, I never really expanded it to being like sort of parallel hunts going on. Just because I suppose in the first game, all of your actions are so singular. Like you are the first one to successfully kill Margot's Blood Nurse, for example.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what ends the dream. So it's, or at least burns down the Hunter's Workshop. So yeah, I think it also just keeps it easier to like keep track of when it's just one thing happening.
Oh,
So at least for this, we're taking the interpretation that there's only one hunter at a time, at the very least.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the hunter story that I designed, my idea for the start of this is just that in the same way you appear from a faraway land and you want to use blood healing in the first game. In this case, you're injured, you've come from somewhere that has suffered some sort of tragedy, and for whatever reason that has left you alone and stumbling through a desert. I went for a kind of African inspiration for the player character, just because it was very different to Victorian from the first game, but also separate kind of from my interpretation of Laurent. And he has the African Kapinga, which is one of those just crazy shaped tribal weapons. Very cool, and I've sort of put in all those patterns of their clothing. So the dream here, it's quite similar architecture, but it's just a little different. It's more of that like soft rounded clay construction. This is supposed to basically be the doll has found you. You're like essentially a potential help. She needs someone to help her enact whatever plan she has, and she can heal you, save you, and also hopefully benefit from your skills, I suppose. You appear to be a warrior, so it kind of explains your fighting ability, at least at the beginning. And yeah, and so she takes you to a new dream. She essentially creates it. She has the Demon Great One with her. The Demon Great One is kind of replacing the presence, so it's totally justifiable that they together somehow can make a new dream. And they make it in the image of your hometown or something like that. It's supposed to invoke like this is kind of like a comforting place for you. She kind of wants to convince you, I suppose, of joining my side and good. So it's sort of formed in your image rather than in the first game guns. And therefore, yeah, so instead of being like a Hunter's Workshop, because it doesn't exist anymore, this is just sort of analogous to your home. And yeah, you see her in here, she's got the pram with her, and the pram's kind of like a makeshift construction. The base of it is the wheelchair that German sits in. It's just got like a canopy over the top.
Nice.
So it was another little link. It's a little less obvious because you never really look at the wheelchair.
Oh, but it's cool.
but it's another nice addition. And yeah, there's the great ones poking its little tentacles out. The thing the description here refers to is how essentially you approach. She doesn't like attack, but if you sort of engage, then she'll become very defensive of the pram, and then like you have some little sort of scripted like fight dance thing, and she'll just incapacitate you. A thing I wanted to just put more ideas in for is the idea of insight. If you get more insight, the game becomes harder but more rewarding. And so this first fight, you're supposed to just lose and to be overpowered and take to the hunter's dream. But like second playthrough or something, if you like manage to dodge around for long enough, she essentially starts using eldritch attacks. So that's why she would you would see some of the tentacles pop out, and because of that, you gain insight. You see something, you're like, what the hell? Why has she got tentacles now? You gain some insight. It's like essentially a boost for hard mode. So at the beginning of the game, you manually set the game to hard mode by doing something like this.
Wow, that's cool. It's in the gameplay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a similar thing that I put in the text is how the various interactions you can have with her in this space. So at the beginning, you can like run over to this and like spam X on it or whatever it is, and she'll be like, "Don't look at that." And if you keep like spamming it, she'll refuse for a while until she's like, "Okay, fine." And you look at it and like, I don't know, lose a bunch of health as you get shocked by whatever you see inside, but
You
also
get frenzied immediately.
yeah, you get frenzied immediately basically, but you gain a bunch of insight. So it's like again just another way that you can boost that at the beginning, put yourself in hard mode, and it's more interesting, more rewarding. Also, I don't know if you read through the bit at the end, like my ending of the game. The true ending is something which is unlocked just by having enough insight when you get to the end. So it's assumed that these are prerequisites of like being able to beat the game. Unless you just spend a bunch of time grinding or something, this is the way you get the necessary insight to get the true ending, the intended ending.
Nice.
So
That's
it's
cool.
sort of
Right there at the beginning. That's really cool.
yeah, exactly. And it's again like an optional hard mode in the same way that you like start Dark Souls classes. You can choose the knight and you're going to have an easier time than choosing the depraved, which is literally just hard mode. You start with nothing. Your stats suck. That's hard mode. They just don't call it that.
Super cool.
This has been such a
Love the fish to reference the Lost Ocean thing.
Yes, so things to do with oceans. Large bodies of water are bulwarks of truth. So essentially barriers to truth. That's the description. Rom, something to do with Rom, and why you kill Rom, and then you can see that you gain access to. Oh fuck, I forget. Yahoo. That's it. Yeah. So
Something garden sleep.
Can you go back to that doll real quick? Is her face cracked? Like the porcelain?
yes.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I put in that as just and I'm saying like how a bit beaten up and scruffy she is here, like she's been alone trying to defend her little baby, not her baby, but like her companion. It just adds a bit to the like she's still frail despite having the the power of the little infant great one to use when she needs it. I didn't want it to look like why are you helping her when she could just go and do this thing on her own. There needs to be a little bit more justification as to like she's looking for someone to try and help her in this new quest of hers. Quickly on the topic of oceans, this could be touched on it. This is a slightly modified version of the deep sea room. It's upside down, like an ocean that used to be there but isn't now, and also it's shaped a little more like the Hunter's Mark, just because I could. I don't know how obvious that is or not, but that's like the main room that I then have just to.
It's pretty subtle, but that's from the house, so it fits. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty subtle
That
one.
was kind of like a scorpion at first.
Like testing something like
Toss
that.
down.
That works too. That works too.
So you said we'll be talking about those teeth things.
Yeah, so essentially I wanted this to feel like oddly living. This desert which is still somehow like a strange source of blood. Like it's bleeding still. It's like injured and it's also referencing to the fact that it used to be an ocean. So this whole place would have been.
White sands, blood, and coral. It's such an interesting three-part idea.
It's a cool combination. And yeah, this place, Loran, used to be surrounded by ocean or lakes or something like that, which meant that the people living there just peacefully lived by with no knowledge of the eldritch truths beneath them. At some point, that dries up or drains away. It causes like sort of famine or something like that. Hence, Loran is ailing. So that's my kind of like justification. That's what kicks off the events there. So the city's ailing, the water's gone, and maybe people are starving or disease is rife, something like that. And so the queen of Loran, again extrapolation, I think it's referenced somewhere that there was a queen, but just in the way that Jan was the queen of the Bavarians, it felt appropriate. And we've got the queen of the Wild Bloods. Like, why not have another queen? It just feels like it fits. She resides with the people, and she wants to save them. So she's like offered some sort of deal. Perhaps a Pthumerian priest shows up, and like in general, the people there are sort of becoming more aware of the strange happenings because the bulwark of truth, the thing that's blocking the truth, has basically gone. The large body of water, the ocean, it's disappeared, or at least it's sunk further into the ground. But it used to be there.
Makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's like it fits together so nicely. So
As someone who has always remembered that particular line about water from Bloodborne, it really it works for me. If someone missed that line, they might be like, seems like a stretch, but
Yeah, exactly. And that's why using the mirage, firstly, it's what happens when you're in a hot desert, but also it gives the implication of ocean. It's like it looks like there's a body of water there, but there isn't. Perhaps because there used to be a body of water there, but now there isn't. So I was like, that's such a nice inclusion. That's one of the reasons I was switching up the composition, because you need to have a flat horizon for that to work. But I still wanted this tangent just to make sure that all of these lines were like making a nice sort of motion towards a pinch on this right hand side, because that's the direction she's traveling. Anyway, so that explains all that stuff in the beginning. The strange sort of desert that's bleeding, and the Ixodida. It describes somewhere in here about how they feed on the blood of the desert, and those forlorn children who are born out of wedlock. So that's in reference to the bastards of Loran. I think this is literally just because it's being discussed in another video, but someone was talking about how, it's interesting, the bastards of Loran were like, they were alien, they had some problem with them that just, either caused them to die or just, the result of their fate or something like that. And they don't appear to be affected by the scourge of the beast. So they didn't die because of that. But also they look totally drained, like they have no blood in them. It could just be because they're old. But I was like, they could have just been sucked dry from the Ixodida that are now like preying on the old city. So that seems to fit quite nicely. The blood that they contain here, it should be healing in some capacity. Like the blood vials in the original game, they are presumably made by the blood ministers, so they have some more blood in them. That's why they can heal you. It's never really explained, I don't think. I never saw reference to that, but it's assumed. And there needs to be a sort of reason why this blood is also special. So I'm thinking that essentially these children, their pregnancies were doomed through a reason that I'll describe later, but it was attempted to save them. They tried to use the blood of the organs to save them, and it failed, but they ended up having that blood within them. So all the Ixodida that have been sucking it up the ground, firstly it's making them grow huge and monstrous, but also it contains whole blood. Same with the blood from the desert. So that's why it can heal you. Otherwise it's just like, I felt like it was something that leaving unexplained just felt lazy, or at least it was missing a vital component of why you used blood vials in the first game rather than any blood. So that was why I did that, and it felt like maybe there wasn't enough blood to go around from just these poor infants. So I was like, let's have the desert bleed as well. That's cool.
At least it's a big move, It makes a big statement, right? Instead of like trying to like kowtow on it, make a small statement. It's like it's really a big part of the environment. So I think that makes it work.
Yeah, and it's like otherwise it's that one step to make a desert feel more soul-spawning than not. You need to to use as much as possible because it's such an otherwise like unfamiliar place, unfamiliar setting for this type of game.
So real quick, I do have to get going pretty soon. This is, I'm not sure how much more you want to kind of cover. If you do want to like kind of just cram everything in the next 15 minutes,
I'll try that.
yeah, 'cause I don't want to cut you short, but it's like I do have to get going.
Cool.
Yeah, Thomas. If you would just do like it'd be great to just hear like, yeah, like Ned said, your quick 10-minute just this is the
Yeah.
thing.
I'll cover just what happens. Yeah.
I would also recommend maybe considering like because you did so much work, like you could make like a PDF and post that with your stuff, and the people who really want to do the full deep dive, they'll do it. Like I think there was a lot of people in the early Bloodborne community who just made basically books about the lore. So
Yeah, true.
you know, it's a very lore interested community. So you could also do a piece of writing there.
I think it'd be good just around each image of like, these are the starting points, these are all the lore items, descriptions that exist, and this is what I read from them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good idea. So, is one of you leaving now? Are you, James? You leaving?
No, not now. Oh,
Cool.
yeah, Dropbox, WeTransfer. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining me.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.
I can do another 10 minutes. So
Cool.
if you
I will do that.
there, then I'll be here.
I can do that download, that like full cover of like the important stuff because I've got stuck in the small details already. So yeah, the city was lost to sands. You know that kept it hidden for ages. I describe how the second big disturbance. Essentially, this is just triggered by the doll and the infant great one get closer. You know that's enough of a presence to disturb the great one that's been sleeping below the city for ages, and so. Big disturbance. Something opens up, presumably, and all the sand drains down, and hence I just like a bit of reference to that, but also I've described it in these descriptions. It's a cool way to make it. You know, there's a reason it's been discovered now versus earlier. So then going through, this was something which I put in earlier, but just to hammer home the idea that this is where the Scourge of the Beast started, and they were already like making trick weapons to try and deal with it. Crap by the Laurel Knights in their desperate fight against the growing Scourge. Cool. The idea was just the beasts and things, like perhaps trying to incapacitate them rather than just kill them outright, like sever their limbs or something to keep them from moving. Because at this point, their friends and families transform into a beast, but they have no idea if they're going to be able to save them or not. So it felt like maybe like an extra age to making this weapon specifically.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
Then this is sort of supposed to be modeled around something that might have been like a nursery or something. Like it's got the imagery of places you'd like keep children, or perhaps a place of birth. And so this is where you find all the ticks that have just been sucking up on that blood to survive. I know, nice and evil and edgy, and again very soft-spawny. So that's the setting for this piece. It's why you find the midwife's cannula here. Cool, makes sense. The midwife's cannula is specific in that it's like slower but greater health restoration. You know, it's one of the more powerful ones. And here we describe some extra stuff. So attempts to aid the doll-based gestating with miraculous blood were in vain. The alien infants were born off form and sickly translucent red. So this is just another reference to the red jelly, which is another weird item you find in the first game. Just like a nice way to sort of contextualize why they exist and what might have caused it. And then the subtle around appears to be ignorance of their celestial eyes. So this is just describing like the great ones that were basically existed below the city or just somewhere, but had been hidden for so long by the ocean. And then as the sky darkened, the beastly fear within them erupted. So it's just talking about how the beast, the curse of the beast, is kind of like drawing out an aspect of mankind that's already there, but sort of has yet to show itself for whatever reason. And it's sort of nice that the curse that the Great One sort of puts across humanity is it's sort of based in something that existed in them already, but it just sort of brings it out and makes it physical, makes it a physical change. As the sky darkening, obviously just referring to the progressing eclipse. So we go forward a bit, and the sort of the thing that happened in Iran in history is that the Queen made some sort of like deal with, like, I think I described it how like a Thumerian priest shows up and offers this deal. Essentially, it's saying, look, we can use blood healing for a price. So this will potentially save the people who are currently dying of starvation or illness. Again, that's just reference to the alien city of Iran, just how it's always described. And the deal is always for the Great One, who has presumably lost its child or whatever, like the law says, and is desperately yearning for a surrogate. So it wants a queen like Yanum to bear its child. So some sort of ceremony is performed. The queen is impregnated with the Great One's child, and as the pregnancy sort of progresses, the eclipse like slowly sort of progresses as well. That's at least how I see it. It would be a fun way to sort of draw an analogy to the blood moon again, and so it just gives like a sense of progression and sort of something coming, some foreboding thing that is making all the people around feel a bit scared, a bit uneasy. Something which she hadn't realized or couldn't have foreseen. I described here in Queen's Canyon. Something about how she takes a deal, and then she would never come to know the true horror. She would be brought on the world.
Sorry about that.
Essentially, to give birth to a Great One, it's always failed, I think, in the lore of the original game. And so it feels like something that's very difficult to cause to happen. My justification of why it might have been successful here is that the sort of requirement, the cost to have a successful Great One be born is that the whole city's like families, anyone who was pregnant or became pregnant during that time, they lose their child or the pregnancy fails or something like that. A bunch of horrible stuff happens. It's bad. It's not good. That's why everyone's like, the Queen's been doing some weird shit. Everyone's family's distraught and stuff, and so a faction of people that are like, we've got to stop it. Whatever she's doing, it's bad. As soon as she became pregnant with this, whatever it was, the sky had become weird and everyone's kid is dying. So a faction is born, and ultimately, like, perhaps as the eclipse sort of becomes full, maybe that's what like pushes them over the edge. The fear within them, the beastly fear, sort of erupts, and they go and they kill the queen. So in this scene, it's described somewhere, but as you go up to the altar, you see like a crumpled figure in royal attire, like on the side of the altar, with stab wounds across the abdomen or something. And the Great One is like cradling like this little blob in like swaddling cloth. Essentially, it would have been the failed infant Great One that it was aiming for, and it basically has just sat there mourning over it in its nightmare since. Like, it's just been desperately sad in this never-ending dream of losing their child. So you go up to it and you go into its nightmare. And the idea is you slay, like, you get the message nightmare slaying. In this case, it's literally you end its nightmare. You sort of free it from it to some extent by killing it in that space. It makes for a cool boss fight. That's the main purpose. But the reason it's there is just because it desperately wanted its kid. It didn't really think too much about the fact that a whole city's worth of people were losing their own. It didn't matter too much. They're not too concerned with humans. They're generally sympathetic, I think the law describes, but whatever. So that's the setup for this space. So that's why you find it here. That's why you fight it. And essentially, the doll's purpose, they are aware of this somehow. Perhaps it's like memories passed down from the moon presence to the infant Great One. it's assumed that the Integrate One and the doll can kind of converse somehow, and she now knows that basically she wants to take the Integrate One to this to Fallen as well, named this, and that should to some extent appease it. So the idea is that you bring it the child surrogate that it wanted, and you end the curse of the beast. So in the first game, you actually don't make any progress in terms of the curse of the beast. It's assumed that that could still happen again. It's never really solved.
Wait, you give the baby Great One to this creature?
Yes. So that's what happens at the end. So with enough,
That would be its child that it has failed to get through all of these human surrogates in the past.
exactly, and now it has a real infant Great One, and it is appeased. The sins of the past. Humanity did go and kill its child. That's not great. Maybe for good reason, but still, bad stuff breeds other bad stuff, and this is like the only chance to really try and undo some of that.
And so the final shot would be like confetti, a birthday party.
I have the complete opposite. The doll and the infant Great One just like go approach the fauna who's just like hovering above the sun altar at the top. So this altar, but in daytime, it's just kind of like quietly hovering above it. If you have enough insight, and the doll will go over with the infant Great One. They'll like just sort of quietly wave goodbye to you, and then the air will like shimmer slightly and that'll just disappear.
It's like a mirage.
The air seems to shiver as they disappear from sight, and silence falls across Loran. The city seems finally to be at rest. Oh. So, a brief note on the doll. The doll is built in Maria's image. When you kill Maria, the doll is clearly aware of that, and I wanted to make it essentially that, the longer the doll exists, the more it sort of just takes on traits of Maria after Maria has been killed. Maria is feels incredibly guilty after what she did to the fishing hamlet, so she has reason to want to do right by the great ones that she has done such wrong by in the past. So to me, I was like, that makes sense. It's a pretty good motivation. She's taken some of that on from Maria, and so apart from making the doll a more interesting character that you can engage with throughout the game, I have the idea that you can do the make contact gesture to her. No, the opposite. Sorry. At some point, she might just randomly do that to you, like a fun quote thing. And if you clap in return, you get insight or something. Just fun things like that. Little details that, which just make it far more engaging. And you can bring her random gifts and stuff. So
Nice.
that's basically it. A nice happy ending essentially for the game, because who doesn't want a happy ending?
When you mention the fact that the Great Ones are described as generally sympathetic, it really is not that unbelievable that they would be, because that is a weird benevolent quality that is ascribed to them that is sort of weirdly out of character with everything else that's going on. So
Exactly.
It is kind of believable, that you can have a kind of handshake deal at the end there.
Yeah, and just the description of how the curses are formed or sort of brought down upon humanity by the Great Ones, that seemed the other things that are described as curses is the curse of the beast. So why not? Why wouldn't that be the origin of the curse of the beast? And so there we go. That's the quick overview of the law that's happening, and I hope that essentially that is you can infer that from the information I put in this the piece with enough of the law in the back.
I think so, yeah.
And that's it.
And can I say that just in terms of the writing, when you do a sequel, the things you repeat from the first thing, that sort of ingrains them as these are the actual themes, right? It confirms it. So there was a lot there, and I think you did a great job being thoughtful. But just to say one thing that really stood out to me is the repeating motif of it's another queen who has made another bad deal with a great one. That's not necessarily a given from Bloodborne 1, that it's this will be the frame of this recurring problem. That's not a given, and to have you frame it as that and repeat that theme makes that really interesting. Makes it interesting. This could happen anywhere if such a noble person were to make a similar mistake. I think that's super cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the theme of repetition goes through a lot of their games, and I suppose this is a break from that because it implies an actual ending. first time you fail and you go back to your hometown with some success because you now have like the blood-getting abilities and you've come from a place that's had some sort of tragedy. But you play the game again, you get like an ending which puts an end to the game. So
Right on. Well, I have to thank you for sharing this with all of us.
thank you for listening to me for a good 2.5 hours.
It's very clear that you're very excited about what you do.
That's a great
I'm
thing.
so happy to see that.
Thank you so much for sharing this, Thomas. This was awesome. And yeah, I mean, geez, look at how much hard work you put into it. You don't get to talk about it for a couple hours. This stuff takes forever, you know. It really is. It's. I think it's well earned. I think it's well earned.
Thank you.
So what I'd want to see what happens, because we're recording this before the results of the competition.
Indeed.
Afterward, I mean, I haven't seen the other entries, but this is a very powerful package. That's a bad phrase, but it's a very, complete package. And I'd be surprised if this doesn't make it into the top tier, whatever. So, yeah, we should do a follow-up after that, and then kind of discuss that. Maybe
That would be good.
invite him onto, or maybe tell him about you onto his channel. I don't know, we'll see.
That would be really cool. I mean, he's big, got a good 2 million subscribers or something. So if he did, that would be awesome because I would love to check out this kind of thing. And or perhaps something, an interview that I hope has as much impact as this might. That could be a great sort of jumping off point to have a discussion like that. Because it'd be really cool to hear his interpretations and things.
Right. Is this posted publicly, or is it submitted to like some kind of private link?
It's not, so I've just put it on that Google Drive, so I will be posting to ArtStation.
So I think we can end the video here. Are there any last words, Mr. Thomas?
You've got to be passionate, when you find something that you're really enjoying, obviously keep going with it. Something I hadn't realized when going in was that I was going to do as much work on this, because I just didn't know how into it I would get. But as soon as I started doing that, writing out on the page, doing all the deep lore diving, I just fell in love with it. So
Awesome. Great to see.
let your creativity flow.
Yes. Steven, any last thoughts?
No, just ditto what Thomas said. I mean, he made it. He proved it right here. The proof is in the pudding. The fun is what matters. You gotta love it. It's like look for the stuff that is really giving you a lot of energy. That's great.
Absolutely. Even if it's just spectacles. Cool. All right. So we'll thank you to everyone who watched this, and definitely check out the links in the description. And we'll see you next time for possibly a follow-up.
Yes.
Bye.
So, bye.
Oh, was that the end of my videos? Yeah. So let me, where'd I leave off? Yeah, let me just do some, because I think this stream's about to end in a little bit, so let me just throw on some Nerd Soup, them talking about House of the Dragon stuff.
All right, you guys want to do your wedding call? Yeah, but can we, do you guys see that they're trying to cancel Snow White?
Did you set a new recording?
Yes, I did. Is this fake or is this real? This is real. 2 riders out in San Francisco trying to cancel the ride. Prince Charming and Snow White, right? No. Snow White's chick that was sleeping, right? They're trying to cancel that ride. True Love's first kiss wakes her up. She's sleeping with the poison. She bit the apple.
Yes. Yeah, I'm seeing.
that right saying that wars, right? They seven them.
Yeah.
The guy that kissed her, the kiss is unconsensual, and they're trying to say that it's unconsensual, like it's assault, and they're trying to cancel the right.
Right, we can't address things like this because this is
Why?
because it's one idiot who wants this to happen, and then it's 20,000 other people telling them that they're stupid. So it's not a thing where society's canceling Snow White.
It might, man. It just needs a little traction.
I had this
Let people say, yeah, it's gonna happen.
when Baby Yoda was canceled. I had the same conversation with a friend. I said, dude, what, one
Oh.
idiot.
Baby Yoda got canceled.
You don't remember when Baby Yoda got canceled for committing genocide?
Oh, that? They tried to cancel him for that?
Yeah.
I
But
canceled
once again, it was one idiot. Yeah, it was Aaron. It was one idiot on the internet with a Twitter account saying Baby Yoda's now canceled, and then you get 400,000 people with Twitter accounts saying, "Oh, this generation, stop, stop, stop."
Yeah, but we need to be the generation that tries to put a stop to it, no?
We need to fight our own generation that's canceling everything.
Yeah.
I've become so apathetic to everything. It's bad. I don't care either way. I just nothing bothers me.
Yeah, the fact that our generation, our nation is canceling a ride,
Yeah, so
Our
whatever.
nation.
or they're trying to.
Whatever.
It's just the fact that it's happening.
I-
We're allowing this to happen in
Yeah.
this country.
What was it last week that you were mad at me but I didn't care about? Like, that doesn't get you upset. I'm like,
What was it?
I forget. That's how little I cared about it.
I forget too.
Yeah,
I cared about
you
it.
were hot about it.
Do you know what he's talking about?
You were revved up.
Not a clue.
I forgot what it was, but you know what it is?
You're depressed.
Yeah, but we didn't know that for years. I just don't care about anything anymore. And it's actually kind of free. You guys should try it. I know you've tried
Yeah,
it.
but your personality isn't there.
I wanted to ask you what happened with the Rangers the other day, but I'm not going to ask you. I'm not going to do you that favor.
I think I've been on autopilot since season 8. Like, in Quick? We've talked about Quick. Have we talked about Quick recently?
Since season 8,
Yeah, I've just been on autopilot.
what about House of Dragon? That's not shaking you out of it?
Well, no, I will eventually, like in House of Dragon, but just with everything.
What if you get so
Dragon
low?
Bill.
You might get so low where you can't come back up though. That's the problem.
No, you know,
Just stop being depressed. That's all you gotta do.
that's it.
Pretty much, yeah.
Oh man, if I can go back in time, to, like 2016, like, yo,
Just stop it.
chill, stop it.
You know where you're going, just don't go there.
And
Pass to you.
24-year-old me would be like, really, that's it?
Let's go for a walk.
I could have been like, who knows where I would be now? Screen Junkies? Collider? It's the only two I could think of.
Nerd Soup. You could have made. Who knows where you could have brought Nerd Soup if you would have not been depressed.
Society if I wasn't depressed.
Yeah, exactly. Far, far into the future. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Nerd Soup Podcast. I'm Bo Oliver, joined you today by Nerd Soup Monkey and Teddy, and we are back for another show that focuses on the world of Hollywood, movies, TV, video games, all that stuff, news, new trailers, content, interviews, scandals, whatever Teddy is pissed about being canceled. Follow us, Nerd Soup Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, all those places.
You gotta leave with that.
Social media, Nerd Soup, Bo Soup, Teddy Nerd Soup, Nerd Soup Monkey.
Funny story. So,
We're back.
like, that's actually something that like I talked to my parents about. It was like the past like 5 years. I felt like it was an autopilot. I forgot where, and then in the same like session, she said something where like she's like, oh, this is why I'll never get better. She was like, I forget what the conversation was about. It's another thing. I probably should remember what I talked about. But anyway, she was like, you know, it's like, well, at least like, you know, you're yourself. And I'm like, well, Jeffrey Dahmer was himself, and that didn't work out too great.
Do you say this to her or you say this in your head?
No, I said it. That's
Like,
like
where'd she go with that?
She laughed, so it was meant as a joke.
She laughed, and yeah, haven't heard from her since.
Yes, she might think I'm a serial killer.
And the cops are in my house 2 days later.
Yeah, she sent me to a new doctor, and I'm going there Wednesday. I'm gonna stay there for about 6 months.
So that's where I go. Like, it's so bad.
New white uniform.
Every like positive reinforcement she gives me, I just like, well,
That's what you can't do. You
Family.
take their positive reinforcement and accept it.
Yes,
Don't
you
try
do.
and like dispute it.
been doing this for like 20 years. I'm not gonna change now.
Do I get brought up in your stuff?
Yeah, I bring you up every time.
Do you really?
I actually did once, and it was not in a good light.
A friend of mine once gave me a great piece of advice. Truly.
That was one of the things about real quick shoot. I was like, I overthink things. Like I wish I took things on the surface and just accepted it.
Yeah.
Like you.
Yeah, no, I am truly jealous of your ability to do that. But
That's a slight to me. I don't like it.
I know. I said
No,
it
it's
was
not a slight. You could take it as a slight, but I think.
I think it's good. I'm envious.
Well, that's what I'm saying. When we did the Ant-Man review, I'm happy to have him watch with you guys.
You're saying that you have problems accepting the positive reinforcement. That a good way to come to accept that is know that you're not the only person dealing with that problem of not being able to accept the positive reinforcement, always having an answer for it. That there are millions of people out there that feel that same way.
Yeah, but I'm worried about me.
Right, but it's I guess it's not a comforting fact to know that you're not alone in feeling that way.
Is this what you're doing?
I think it is a comforting fact because I just left you speechless.
No, I'm trying to think, and
He's trying to think of an answer back to you.
no, I
It
just
doesn't happen.
that made me feel nothing.
Damn.
You're like, I feel so much worse.
Yeah, you should not quit your day job.
I thought that was a great piece of advice.
Maybe
because you're the most mentally
I'll
healthy individual.
I'll ponder that later tonight, and if it works, then I'll just start paying you.
I like that. Yeah, subscribe to the Patreon for both therapy.
Tell him.
I'm promoting that for everyone out there.
I thought you were telling him to.
I guess maybe that would work. Cause like if I want to learn how to play baseball, I'll go to a baseball coach. It's like you know the game.
Yeah, but I don't know how to play it.
You just dealt with it.
You're the guy who like never played baseball, who like knows the game,
Studies this.
so you can like,
Yeah.
I'm the Tim Kirchin of baseball.
yeah, so you know the game.
Of depression.
They put you on the field, you can't swing, you know.
No, but my I know who played second base for the Brewers in 1989.
You really do you?
No, I can't tell you who played second base ever for the Brewers ever.
Robin Yount.
Is he the current second baseman?
I think Wong is the second baseman.
Was Ryan Braun a second baseman? No, he was a
Left
left fielder.
fielder.
Left fielder? First baseman? Maybe when I got older.
Christian Yelich is good.
There's a UFO passing over the house. Wait for that to go, and then we'll dive into the first story.
Pretty sure that's not how it's supposed to
Can you
go.
stop shitting? All right, let's jump into the first story.
Actually, going good.
First official images. Steve, it's because of that line I told you.
Yeah.
I just fucking.
Subliminally, it's just doing it in your head right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story that we had the leaked pictures.
Oh, these got leaked.
Were you on that podcast? Yeah, you was, right?
Yeah, it was, but these don't look leaked. These look like they were.
No, these are official. These
All
are
right.
official coming from HBO.
That always happens, right?
Candid. He's staring at the camera.
Little league comes out, they're like, I guess we gotta fucking release the good ones.
A little leak comes out. Right. Or maybe it was planned, right?
You know, I'm taking a poop. Little league comes out.
Did you hear about the Schefter kind of just made up the Rodgers story? Not that he made it up, but there was nothing official leaked for him to report on that day. It was a planned report
Yeah.
from ESPN, yeah.
I like that. Wait, planned report saying that he
People were
was
shitting on Schefter, yeah. He's like, it wasn't a story, it wasn't information that I received on draft day. It was kind of a accumulation of events, and then they released.
So
Let's go to the House of the Dragon before we get on that. Schefter fucked up.
Is Rogers leaving?
I hope. Yeah. These images look, like you said, Teddy, they're definitely high definition. We have Emma Darcy as Rhaenyra Targaryen, Matt Smith as Daemon Targaryen, Stephen Toussaint as Corlys Velaryon, Olivia Cook as Alicent Hightower, and her father, Otto Hightower, being played by Rice Ithans. All looks like they're at Dragonstone, or it could be in Dorne. Some blue skies, blue sea. Corlys
Yeah.
Velaryon looks like a fucking badass.
There he goes.
That is
Yeah, I
a
don't have
pirate,
that.
man.
The middle picture.
I emailed you, yeah.
I know, I just don't have it up.
Yeah, no, he's fucking. He looks like he's about to navigate some seas.
In the middle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not much, but it's still something. Hey, 2022, it's right around the corner.
It's just cool to know that it's being brought into existence.
Yeah, definitely.
There are cameras capturing people delivering fictional lines of dialogue, and that we're going to see how this all plays out in less than a year. We think.
Trailer soon then, right? Or, no, I don't know about soon, but coming up.
Well, with Game of Thrones, they usually keep the trailers close
Like
to
to
the
the
release
state.
date. But my theory is that they want to get on top of this.
After season 8, you want to start getting hype back up?
There's like a
Start
sweet
that train.
spot. I feel like if you go too early, you can lose some of that momentum you build, and if you go too late, you're not building enough momentum.
I think summer would be a perfect opportunity. Late summer, August trailer, minute 30, coming next spring.
I think it all depends too. It's like if HBO has like a show they really want people to see.
Yeah.
By the way, mayor of something. It's a new HBO show with Kate Winslet.
Oh, is that supposed to be the next big show?
No, it's out right now. I hear it's like the big people like it.
Better than Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones? I really think that this could be something special, man.
I hope so.
So does how what
I know what I'm saying is like, sorry, Ted.
Oh yeah, your HBO show.
It's like, well, no, I was just that was another.
So mayor.
I go on the sidebars a lot, or I get distracted. It's the word association. We talked about this. That's the problem I have. One thought goes to another and goes to another.
That's the ink block test, right?
Huh?
Ink block test.
Yeah,
You do one of those?
Rorschach check.
Rorschach? Yeah. The Rorschach test. Is that what it is?
Rorschach wears a mask with the Rorschach test.
Rorschach
On
test.
it.
No, that's
Ink
like.
blot test.
You just throw me off.
You look at the ink blot.
I do you
what
want to see
see?
it up? Well?
I was so happy 5 minutes ago. I was saying like they'll probably wait like whatever they have in the pipeline that they really want to promote and kind of they think might be good. They might attach like a trailer to that. So if that
Right.
comes out like September, and like oh we need to get people, we need eyeballs on this. Let's put the trailer before this on HBO or something.
Well,
like
when
that.
does Succession season
really?
3 come out? Do you know? Is that supposed to be this
Ooh.
year? That would seem
They're
like
filming now, so I don't know. I think it's next year.
It's gonna be fun when those shows are running together.
Yeah, definitely. I think Succession probably is the best show going on right now. So.
Yeah, we have some Succession news to talk about later in this podcast.
Is House of Dragon a multiple season? Is House of Dragon a multiple season show?
I don't even know why he's keeping stuff anymore, because he leaves them all in.
Does it?
Yeah.
No, that season? Yeah, I'm gonna cut out there. No, I cut out the ridiculous ones. You like kind of stumble on a word and then you'll have to, well,
I
put on your
That's embarrassing.
I'm insecure.
Alex Trebek voice. RIP.
Aaron Rodgers might take his shot.
Somebody was saying Jeopardy doesn't pay as much as a starting NFL quarterback, but you can host Jeopardy.
You don't get
until you're 90.
CTE
Yeah.
from Jeopardy.
Imagine.
Obviously, the opposite. I assume Brady gets
Yeah.
more knowledge.
Imagine they started tackling the Jeopardy host.
I'm thinking you do a season of Jeopardy and go back to football.
No, you can't do that to Jeopardy. That's a
Well,
bond
make it good.
contract. You're there for 40 fucking years.
It's like
It's
a
your
Wheel
kids
40.
get- Yeah, you have to pay. Yeah, right. But look at those hosts.
I know.
They do that until they fucking die.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Specs is a different breed, though.
You gotta go someday.
They don't make him like him
What's the
anymore.
guy's name that does
Who?
Trebek?
No, I mean the GOAT, without a doubt. Big shoes to fill.
Bob Barker or Trebek?
Can you Trebek? Aaron Rodgers had to fill the shoes of Brett Favre. Now he might have to fill Trebek's shoes.
Yeah, well, that man.
You did a good job filling Brett Favre's shoes.
Yeah, imagine he just became better than Trebek.
What's the worst shoes to fill?
Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man.
Oh, is there going to be another Iron Man?
Maybe not. But I feel bad for the person that would ever.
Didi got booed like game 1 for replacing Barry Jeter, who just retired.
Randall replacing Melo.
Yeah, it wasn't like they shipped over or TV pushed it out.
Well, New York fans are psychotic.
If Melo was on this Knicks team beside Melo, where are we at? Prime Melo.
Same spot.
Yeah, no, it probably. Yeah, around the same spot. I think with Randall, the team is. They just got lucky. They built a really good team around Randall. I don't think Melo ever. They never maximized the roster for Melo's skills. Melo needed a team like that 2011 Mavs team, where Melo can be Melo, everyone else plays their role. This Knicks team very much runs through Julius Randle. You don't run offenses through Melo in that way because he was never a great playmaker.
Now back to House of the Dragon.
Check out my podcast, Ball Night.
Wait, so is
Well, I think Olivia Cook is going to be the breakout of the show as Alison Hightower. She's one of the most colorful characters from the story, from any story that George R. R. Martin has written. I think she's one of the most talented young actresses working today. Her performance in Thoroughbreds, that just proves it. If you're looking for a great Olivia Cook performance. You're not familiar with her, watch Thoroughbreds. Not that great of a movie, but she is fantastic in it. And just the look on her face, she's up to something. That's going to be a fun dynamic there. The father and daughter kind of plotting and scheming together.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I can't wait for this. I just.
Like Cersei and Tywin.
Nice.
Come on.
Yeah, man.
Wow.
50-50 gets you. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't.
I do
know
hope.
the name of the actor who played Tywin?
Skarsgård?
Yeah. You know what? I respect the guess. But you don't know it's like choosing C in the multiple tests, right? Multiple choice. Oh, sorry.
That's what I was saying. I'm Tyrion and Tywin. Tyrion and Tywin. Tywin.
Jamie. All right, let's move on here to the next story.
Wait. Is this a multiple season show?
Yeah, I think it will be a multiple season show. I was wondering that on a few podcasts back, how long is this story going to span? Because there's a lot that they can get into. But
I'm still hoping for a House of the Dragon anthology. But
Well, you guys said
this could be the start of that, man.
You said this book was a novella, right? Novella, whatever it is. And that, I mean,
Norvell Pell.
are they necessarily short? Or is it just like another word for a long book?
Well, somebody commented and actually disagreed with that.
How long is the book?
Of it being a novella. They said, you're an idiot. Count the pages next time. Stupid. Unsubscribe.
Oh, so the page count
Considered
on
a
novellas
novella.
and books? There's a page count on it?
I just gotta Google it.
I am, because I.
Look up the outline, my guy. Yeah, they also told us that. Wait, what did you say, Ted?
I said there's a cutoff, like there's a page limit of what a novella is and a regular book, I guess?
Yeah, it's sort of like a short film.
Okay.
Short film, they usually say doesn't go above 50 minutes.
Oh, that's weird. Because on like the Wikipedia, where under novellas is the Princess and the Queen, which is the story that they. I don't know, it's just strange to me. It probably is, it probably is the length of a typical novel, but compared to the other novels, it's a novella within the novels of something else.
I made that up. Nobody found it.
I'd love to fucking fight that hypothetical person.
Actually, they did.
I'm
We got a
like,
message today on the Patreon. I posted on Twitter. You guys saw that?
Why?
No?
He canceled his pledge because he said, and I quote, "You guys are slurping the fraud too much."
A fraud.
How much was the?
And just like that, LeBron is coming on the next podcast. I was like, yes.
We're slurping Braun too much?
How much was his patron?
Was it a shot?
He's a loyal listener. So I appreciate the laugh. I appreciate the support. His name is John Ford.
I know, but if it's enough, I'll say LeBron sucks right now.
I don't appreciate the unsubscribe though.
It's not enough. Keep slurping.
Okay.
Okay. Come back though.
Yeah, if he's dropping bills, I mean,
Right.
I'm fucking Skip Bayless.
They want us to slurp George Gamble. Let's move on to the next story here. You have DC rebooting Superman, another story that we talked about on the previous podcast. And now it looks like it's going to be official that DC will be rebooting Superman as a black Superman.
They're still going with
They're
that?
going to bring Calvin Ellis to the big screen, who was the
Oh, it's gonna be Cal?
It's going, yeah, no, it's going to be Kal-El.
Nice.
So, like I've maintained with many comic book characters, the color of their skin is totally irrelevant. When I remember at the comic book shop when someone was complaining about Black Spider-Man, like, my God, have you ever been to Queens?
Yo, for real. Demographic and please.
Do you know who lives in New York City? Spider-Man being a white dude is actually probably the most unrealistic version of Spider-Man. But hey, have at it, right? It's the same thing with Kal-El. He's a humanoid alien. He can be any shape, any size. I prefer him to be 6'4" and ripped. But at the end of the day, skin color doesn't matter.
That's what I was gonna say. I think your best bet is to do the best Superman you can make as the original origin, because you're gonna have people already doubting it just from the beginning just because they're making him black. And I think maybe if you stray too far away from the Superman, the story that everyone knows, maybe you run into a little more problems. There's a story like everyone knows. There's enough comic books on to reference from. You can make the story right.
Right, I think there's definitely an aspect of there's so much good material out there that
Yeah.
hasn't been adapted with Superman. Just take your pick, right?
Mhm.
The other side of this was people being frustrated over Warner Brothers' treatment of Ray Fisher. But they think this is a bit disingenuous, like they're trying to
Check it out.
Make good on that?
right and also change the narrative here.
Yeah.
Ray Fisher lost his opportunity to star in a solo film. Ray Fisher was treated poorly on the set of Justice League, but now the headlines are DC's making a black Superman. I think there's some legitimacy to that complaint.
Yeah, like you said, I just want like a good Superman story, and we really haven't. Like, I like Man of Steel, but we really haven't had that iconic Superman movie. You can argue the first one, but I wasn't alive there, and I probably view it a lot differently than people who probably grew up with that movie.
Yeah, it's big.
And I think that
It's still good.
we were always perplexed, like how did why is Superman not working? It was never Henry Cavill's fault. I think he was actually a good Superman, and I think that kind of like the only like negative I have on this story is that we just Cavill's done pretty much, and and I think it's very clear that DC is pushing forward with their separating themselves from the DCEU. Even though they're still making DCEU movies, but more and more we're getting separate Joker movies, separate Batman movies, now separate Superman movie. Wonder Woman 1984 was kind of separate, even though there was some Shiazo's connection to the other movies, but
Yeah, we actually could have talked about, didn't even put that on the outline, Joker 2 reportedly being in development. Another story that's more rumors and something we've talked about before. But yeah, it looks like they are making the effort to separate, create 4 or 5 or 6 different universes.
what's Joker 2 gonna do? What's he gonna be up to?
Like, shake my hand and then he shocks you.
Just the squirting flower.
We live in a society. Make him laugh, yeah.
Oh, that was the thing I mentioned the other day. I saw on IMDb. I was on the Zack Snyder Cut's IMDb. And one of the frequently asked questions is, "What does the Joker mean when he says we live in a society?"
No.
That's so fucking funny.
Wasn't there a story with him the other day? You wanted to do something, people got mad at him?
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
you talked about
the
the
Joker.
idea of him directing a Marvel movie. No, Zack Snyder.
The bigger
Zack
problem. What did you say?
No, go ahead.
There you go.
That zombie movie coming out yet?
It's coming. Or maybe then. Hopefully Netflix gets back to me with those fucking screens. Go ahead.
That'd be sick. We say it all the time though. The problem DC runs into is the Marvel buzzsaw, and they just keep trying to replicate Marvel with the big universe. And like we always say, Marvel, what they did is lightning in a bottle, and it may never be replicated.
They're gonna take a step back and be like,
Just just take a step back and make the best movies you can make.
it's like, all right, well,
You know, stop trying to.
what did
fit
we
that
really
criteria.
do when we created the best superhero trilogy of all time? The best superhero movie of all time was Dark Knight. What went right there? Got a great director, great writer, and we let them do their thing and make their movie in their own universe. Why don't we do that again?
Yeah, that's how the MCU started. Iron Man, John Favreau, Robert Downey Jr. There was no intention to create a cinematic universe.
Right.
The only intention was to create a good movie, and they hadn't. Well, they didn't do that early on, so they didn't have that built-in advantage. Marvel fumbled right after Iron Man a few times,
Oh yeah.
but because that first one was good, they still had the foundation, and Avengers hit. That's over. DC's not doing that. They're not even
Yeah.
trying. Like we've mentioned many times. They're
Well,
doing
that was
this
the
fucking
problem.
Elseworld shit.
That was the problem though. They were
That was the
trying
problem.
Too
Yes,
much to
yeah, they
replicate
did want
Marvel.
to. But they failed right off the bat.
All right, let me grab this picture. We'll call this one quits on this episode. Just wanted to get a render with the new face. I know it's very similar to this one here, but I wanted to change the stance up a bit. There's a reason for it. Obviously, the colors are wrong in that one, but that's something I could fix in Photoshop. But really, I just wanted to kind of get something out there. I know it's been a few days. I've been making adjustments to my schedule and everything, so there's been a lot going on. Either way, yeah, man, I'm happy with this. I'm loving this, and I love what I'm doing with this character, where it's going, and everything like that. So, yeah, man, this is just another episode of the Andrew Glowczewski Experience, episode 136. Working on character concept art of this golden beast over here. And yeah, man, I appreciate y'all. I'm G Mr. Drew. That's at G Mr. Drew on all socials. You can follow, like, and subscribe. Links are in bio, as well as my website, gmrdrew.art. You can find anything and everything there, as well as all the links and contact info if you want to work with me, if you want to hire me, you want, have me do some freelance for you. You have anything that you just want visualized and brought to life, I could do that. So, anywho, I want to thank y'all for watching. I love y'all. I'll be back, man. Peace.